The Alpha's daughters ripped her dress at the Luna selection, until the Alpha gave her his cloak. The cold wind of Lithuria whispered across the frost-tipped towers of the capital. Ilara's breath formed tiny clouds as she walked toward the grand hall, her heart hammering in her chest. Today was the Luna selection, a ceremony older than any living memory, a tradition meant to honor the Alpha and his pack, while the daughters of the kingdom showcased their grace, their charm, and their devotion to the Alpha's house. Ilara had never been one for pomp or attention. She was a quiet noblewoman from a lesser house, known more for her sharp mind and gentle kindness than for beauty or wealth. Yet, today she walked among women who carried themselves like queens even before the crowns were bestowed. The hall sparkled with chandeliers hung like frozen stars, and banners of the Alpha's sigil waved from the balconies, casting shadows over the marble floors. The scent of incense mixed with the faint musk of animals brought by the ceremonial packs filled the air. The Alpha's daughters stood at the top of the grand staircase, each one draped in flowing silks of deep crimson, silver, and midnight blue. Their eyes, sharp as hawks, measured every newcomer. Ilara's dress, though simple, was embroidered with subtle silver threads, a quiet elegance that did not demand attention. But she could feel their gazes, cold and cutting, as though they were weighing her soul before the ceremony had even begun. "Look at her," whispered a daughter, her voice sharp and haughty. "Does she even know how to stand like a noble?" Ilara tried to keep her composure, but her hands shook slightly. She had prepared for the ceremony, but she had not prepared for cruelty in its purest form. As she ascended the staircase, a small misstep sent her skirts brushing against the polished marble. One of the daughters laughed, high and piercing, and soon all of them joined in. And then it happened. With synchronized precision, the Alpha's daughters reached forward, their hands ripping at the delicate fabric of Ilara's dress. The silver threads tore with a faint, sickening sound, and in a moment the dress hung around her in tatters. Gasps echoed through the hall. Nobles whispered, guards froze, and Ilara stood there, cheeks burning with shame, unable to move or speak. She wanted to vanish, to sink into the floor and disappear, but before anyone could act further, a shadow moved across the hall. Every head turned as the Alpha himself descended the stairs. He was tall, broader than any man in the room, and his silver eyes shone like moonlight on steel. His presence silenced the laughter immediately, and even the Alpha's daughters felt the weight of his gaze. Without a word, he extended his hand and draped his ceremonial cloak over Ilara's shoulders. The fabric was heavy, dark as the night sky, embroidered with sigils of his house. It smelled faintly of pine, smoke, and something older, something almost alive. The hall fell silent, every eye now fixed on the two of them. Ilara felt an electric shock pass through her at the touch of the cloak. It was protective and commanding all at once. The humiliation of the torn dress faded slightly beneath the weight of this unexpected, potent gesture. The Alpha's daughters recoiled, their faces twisted in fury and disbelief. The court murmured, unsure whether this was favor, warning, or something else entirely. "You will not be harmed here," the Alpha said, his voice deep and unyielding. "Not while I am present." Ilara's heart raced. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to ask why, but her voice was trapped in her throat. The cloak seemed to hum against her skin, and she noticed a strange insignia stitched along the hem, a mark of the pack she did not recognize. As the Alpha returned to his throne, his eyes never leaving hers, Ilara felt a pull she did not understand. Fear, awe, and something dangerous and thrilling mingled inside her. She was suddenly aware of how fragile her position was, yet also how deeply the cloak had changed her standing in the room. She was no longer just a victim. She was under the protection of the Alpha himself. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Ilara moved carefully, aware of every gaze, every whisper. Nobles curtsied, others bowed, all recognizing the significance of the cloak draped over her shoulders. The Alpha's daughters avoided her eyes entirely, their smiles gone, replaced with something sharper, colder, like knives hidden in silk. After the ceremony, Alara was escorted to a quiet chamber. She sat on a high-backed chair, feeling the weight of the cloak settle around her like a living thing. The insignia glowed faintly in the torchlight, a pale silver that seemed to pulse with energy. She ran her fingers over the symbol, a mixture of fear and fascination filling her. What did it mean? Why had the Alpha given it to her? Outside the chamber, the world continued. Courtiers whispered of scandal, of audacity, and of the strange, almost supernatural protection that the Alpha had granted her. Yet inside, Alara's mind was a storm. She wanted to flee, to hide, but she could not deny the strange warmth and power she felt beneath the cloak. It was as though she had crossed a threshold into a world she had only glimpsed in dreams, one of power, danger, and ancient forces. Her thoughts wandered to the Alpha himself. Tall, imposing, yet there had been something almost gentle in the way he had draped the cloak over her, a fleeting kindness that clashed with the tales of his cruelty. A flash of something more human, more complicated, had shone in his eyes, and for the first time, Alara felt curiosity mingled with fear. Who was this man? What burden did he carry? And why had he chosen to shield her in a moment that should have destroyed her? Night fell over Lithuria, and the castle quieted except for the soft crackling of the torches along the hallways. Alara could hear distant howls echoing from the forests surrounding the palace, the Alpha's pack, a constant reminder that power and danger were inseparable here. She hugged the cloak closer, feeling it as a shield, a warning and a promise all at once. As she finally allowed herself to rest against the chair, her eyes caught the insignia once more. Faint and intricate, it seemed to shift in the torchlight, almost alive. And then she heard it, a whisper in her mind, soft and melodic, almost like a sigh carried on the wind. You belong to the wild now, but at a cost. Alara's heart stuttered. The words were not spoken aloud, yet they rang with undeniable truth. She did not yet know what the cost would be, or how deeply her life was about to change. But she felt it, the stirrings of fate, unrelenting and relentless, beginning to weave its threads around her. Her hand lingered on the cloak's hem, tracing the symbol once more. She shivered, not from the cold but from the weight of destiny pressing down upon her. The Alpha had chosen her, marked her, and in doing so had drawn her into a world she had only glimpsed in tales of fire, shadow, and moonlight. Somewhere deep in the forest, the Alpha's eyes were upon her still, and Alara knew, with a certainty that made her chest tighten, that nothing, not the daughter's cruelty, not her own fear, would ever make her the same again. The night grew still, but the whisper lingered, echoing in her mind like a promise or a threat. She could not yet say which it was. And in that silence, the first thread of a bond was spun, one that would pull her into shadow, power, and the dangerous stirrings of a heart not entirely her own. The morning sun broke over the frost-dusted towers of Lithuria, painting the castle in pale gold and shadow. Alara stood in the quiet courtyard, the cloak still draped over her shoulders. Though it no longer felt heavy, it hummed faintly against her skin, a constant reminder of the Alpha's claim and the power that had chosen her. Every glance from the nobles seemed to test her, every whisper a question she could not yet answer. The Alpha, tall and formidable, appeared at the far edge of the courtyard. His silver eyes, sharp and unblinking, regarded her with a calm that made her stomach twist. He had returned the night before, silent and unreadable, and now he moved as though nothing had happened. Yet the cloak's whispering pulse reminded her that everything had changed. "You are early," he said, his voice low, resonant, like a bell struck in stone. I could not sleep," Alara admitted, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. He nodded once, as though the answer satisfied him, and then motioned for her to follow. Without another word, he led her through the castle, down hidden corridors lined with ancient tapestries and fading murals. The walls seemed to hum with a life of their own, each step echoing like a heartbeat. Alara had never been inside these parts of the castle before. Even her own house, though noble, did not possess halls this old, this alive. She could feel the stories pressed into the stone, the whispered memories of past alphas and their decisions. And now, somehow, she was entwined with that history. They emerged into the outer gardens, a wild stretch of trees and frozen streams, the early frost glimmering like silver dust. The alpha gestured toward the edge of the forest. "We will train," he said simply, "and not just in courtly manners or etiquette. You must understand what lies beyond these walls if you are to survive here." Alara blinked. "Train? In what exactly? In power, in danger, in the ways of this kingdom and my pack." His gaze was steady, unwavering. "And in yourself." For a moment the words struck her like a blade. She had thought the cloak was a shield, a protection from humiliation. But now she realized it was also a binding, a silent contract she had not yet fully understood. The forest air was sharp and biting. Snow crunched beneath their feet as he guided her among trees older than memory, where shadows pooled like liquid and the wind carried whispers from places unseen. He watched her movements closely, correcting her stance, her grip, even the rhythm of her breath. Every motion was precise, every gesture examined, yet he offered no unnecessary praise. Alara's frustration mounted. She was not a child. She had read books of strategy and history, learned the ways of her ancestors, and yet he treated her as if she had nothing. And yet, she could not deny that he was teaching her things she had never imagined. He pointed out the hidden signs of danger in the woods, the way the frost could reveal predators, even those invisible to the eye. He taught her how to listen not just to sound but to the very life around her. By the time the sun had climbed high, Alara was exhausted. She wanted to fall to the ground, to weep from the mixture of fear, exhilaration, and something strange she could not name. Yet he did not relent. "You are not ready," he said finally, his silver eyes catching the sunlight, turning it cold. "Not yet, but you are close, close." The word lingered in her mind. She had never been praised so quietly, so deliberately. And beneath that praise she felt an unspoken expectation, a weight heavier than the cloak itself. Days passed in a blur of training and observation. At court, the Alpha's daughters continued their subtle games of sabotage. A stolen parchment here, a whispered rumor there. Each time Alara felt the sting, but the cloak shielded her. Every time she faltered, he was there, a silent presence, correcting, guiding, protecting, though never explaining why. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting the castle in gold and shadow, Alara found herself alone in the forest with him. The wind carried a strange scent, earth, frost, and something wild. She could hear the distant howl of the Alpha's pack, the same wolves that had been a distant presence at the ceremony. "Why do you protect me?" she asked suddenly, unable to keep the question inside. Her voice was small, almost lost against the wind. The Alpha stopped, his tall figure outlined against the fading light. "Because you are not like the others," he said. "Because you do not belong to the games, to their cruelty, and because your fate is tied to mine." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. Fate. The word had been whispered before in the cloak's secret language, and now he spoke it aloud, cold and certain, like a law of the world she had only begun to understand. "I don't understand," she said softly. "What does that mean?" "That you will be tested," he replied, his voice distant, almost thoughtful. "By the court, by the pack, by yourself." And then he stepped closer, and Alara noticed the scent of pine and smoke more strongly, the sharp metallic tang of power lingering in the air. She wanted to step back, but a strange force held her in place, a gravity she could not name. "You have power," he said finally, as though reading her thoughts, "even if you do not know it, and there are those who would see it taken, controlled, twisted. They will come." Alara swallowed, fear rising, but also a spark of something stronger. If he believed she had power, then perhaps she could learn to wield it. Perhaps she could survive the games, the whispers, the cruelty, and emerge not broken, but transformed. The Alpha's daughters, however, were relentless. One morning, a new insult awaited her in the hall, a carefully arranged display meant to humiliate her before the court. The nobles were watching, their eyes curious and hungry for scandal. Alara's hands shook, and for a moment the memory of her torn dress flashed across her mind. She could feel the blood rush to her face, the familiar sting of shame. But then he appeared, silent, commanding, a shadow among shadows. He stood beside her, his cloak brushing her arm, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of protection. The daughters faltered, the nobles paused, and the moment of potential disaster passed. The cloak and the Alpha behind it had become more than protection. It was a declaration. Yet even in triumph, Alara felt the tension coiling in the air. The Alpha's words from the forest echoed in her mind. "You will be tested, by the court, by the pack, by yourself." Later that night she returned to her chambers, exhausted and restless. The cloak hung beside her, pulsing faintly as though aware of her presence. She traced her fingers over the insignia again, feeling the faint warmth of it. And then she heard it, a whisper, soft, almost playful, like a secret carried on the wind. "They do not understand you." "Neither do you yet," Alara shivered. The words were neither comforting nor threatening, but they carried weight. She had crossed the threshold into a world of shadows and power, a world where every gesture, every glance, and every heartbeat held meaning she had not yet learned to read. The next day brought a different challenge. The Alpha summoned her to the outer woods once more, but this time it was not training. Wolves circled silently at a distance, their eyes gleaming in the early light. Alara realized with a shock that these were not mere beasts. They were part of the Alpha's court, loyal to him and now in some way to her. "You must learn to command them," he said. "Not with cruelty, not with force, but with understanding, with connection. The pack respects strength but also wisdom. They will test you as well." Alara nodded, her throat tight. She stepped forward slowly, hands trembling, and extended her palm toward a massive wolf whose fur shimmered like silver in the morning sun. Its golden eyes regarded her for a long moment, and then, slowly, it bowed its head. A thrill ran through her, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The forest seemed to pulse around her, alive with energy, magic, and possibility. The Alpha watched silently, expression unreadable, until the wolf finally stepped back, leaving her trembling yet unbroken. "You are learning," he said at last, "and soon the court will test you again. This time it will not be simple words or laughter. They will seek to break you." Alara swallowed, the weight of his words pressing down like the winter snow. She did not yet know what trials awaited her, what betrayals or dangers would come. But one truth had become undeniable. She was no longer the same woman who had walked into the Luna selection. She had been chosen, marked, and drawn into a web of power, danger, and destiny. And even as she rested that night, her mind filled with shadowed forests, silver-eyed wolves, and the Alpha's piercing gaze, she knew that her path had only just begun. The cloak hummed softly beside her, as though alive, as though aware of the trials yet to come. And in its quiet, persistent whisper, she heard the promise and the warning of a fate she could not yet escape. The first threads of understanding began to form in her mind. She would not be a pawn. She would survive. She would learn. And somehow, she would find the courage to face whatever darkness lay ahead, even if it meant standing beside the Alpha in ways she had not yet imagined. But as the moon rose high over Lithuria, casting silver light across the castle towers, a shadow stirred in the forest beyond, a presence watching, waiting, knowing that the coming days would test them both, in ways neither could yet foresee. Alara hugged the cloak around her shoulders once more. The whisper was there again. "You will not stand alone, but the price will be known soon." And for the first time, Alara felt the stirrings of something like hope, wild, fragile, and dangerous, yet undeniable. The frost in the morning air bit harder than usual, as if the forest itself sensed the tension that had grown between Alara and the world she had stepped into. The castle of Lithuria seemed farther away than ever, its towering walls a distant echo of comfort she had once known. Yet she could feel the Alpha's presence lingering like a shadow, a quiet pull she could not resist nor fully comprehend. It had been weeks since the Luna selection, and the court had grown restless. The Alpha's daughters, furious that their schemes had failed repeatedly, now resorted to subtler forms of sabotage. Rumors whispered of plots to claim the cloak itself, and the nobles' curiosity had shifted toward suspicion. Alara could feel their eyes on her constantly, measuring, judging, doubting. Then came the breaking moment. During a late evening gathering, one of the Alpha's daughters approached her with false sweetness, handing a small, sealed scroll. Alara, exhausted from the day's training and tense from constant scrutiny, accepted it without caution. The seal was broken, and inside were words she could not ignore. Accusations of plotting against the Alpha himself, claims that she sought to steal power from the pack. The court erupted into quiet murmurs as the daughter smirked, hiding satisfaction behind delicate fingers. Alara's heart sank. She had tried to survive, to learn, to prove herself, but now she was being accused of betrayal. She felt the sting of humiliation rise once more, the kind that had burned in her chest when the Luna selection had begun. Her fingers tightened around the cloak, but even its weight, its hum of power, could not protect her from the dread pooling in her stomach. The Alpha was not there. And for the first time, Alara felt the loneliness of her situation. A bond that should have been protective now felt like chains. She knew she had to act, but every path seemed dangerous. If she revealed her thoughts to the court, they would use it against her. If she ran, she risked her life in the wilds, untrained and vulnerable. By nightfall, she made her choice. Alara slipped silently from the castle, moving through hidden corridors and shadowed gardens, following paths she had memorized during her early training. The forest welcomed her with icy arms, but even in its cold embrace she felt a strange thrill. Here, away from the court, she was not a pawn or a victim, she was herself, and she could decide her own steps. Yet she was not alone for long. From the shadows emerged the Alpha's daughters, swift and silent, their eyes gleaming with malice. They had anticipated her escape. They circled her, whispers sharp as knives, mocking her, reminding her of the cloak, of the power she did not yet understand. Alara's heart raced, but her fear gave way to determination. She had trained under the Alpha, learned to move, to watch, to listen. She was ready to fight, not with weapons, but with will and wit. The eldest daughter lunged, trying to pull the cloak from her shoulders. Alara moved instinctively, sidestepping, twisting, letting the cloak's hum guide her balance. It was as if the fabric itself had a pulse, a rhythm she could follow, guiding her movements. The daughters stumbled, unprepared for the subtle strength that Alara now carried. In that moment she realized that the cloak was not only protection, it was empowerment, a symbol of her bond with the Alpha and with the wild forces of Lithuria itself. Then came the howl, a sound that split the night, low and commanding. The wolves of the Alpha's pack emerged from the shadows, surrounding the daughters, their golden eyes glowing in the moonlight. The daughters shrieked, retreating, and for the first time Alara felt the full weight of the Alpha's unseen presence. She was not alone, not truly. The forest seemed to lean closer, its shadows stretching, alive with anticipation. Alara and the daughters faced one another, but now the power had shifted. The daughter's cruelty had fueled something within her, something sharp, fierce, and undeniable. When the daughters finally fled, Alara sank to the frozen ground, breath coming in shallow gasps. The cloak lay heavy on her shoulders, warm and comforting. She felt a strange mixture of fear, relief, and exhilaration. Her chest ached with longing not for revenge, but for the one who had given her the cloak, the one who had drawn her into this web of destiny and danger. It was then, in the quiet of the forest, that she heard the Alpha's voice behind her. "You did well," he said, calm and deep, yet carrying an edge that made her pulse quicken. Alara rose, startled. You were watching," he nodded. "Always, but sometimes you must face the shadows yourself. That is how strength is measured." She wanted to speak, to ask why he had chosen her, why the cloak, why this path, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply bowed her head, letting the cold wind chase the words she could not find. The Alpha's gaze softened just slightly, and then he spoke again. "The pack respects courage, but it also respects wisdom. You have courage. Now learn the wisdom." Over the following days, Alara faced trials that tested more than her physical skill. She was taught to read the signs of danger, subtle movements in the wind, shifts in the forest sound, the silent language of the wolves. She learned to anticipate, to understand before acting, to trust instinct and observation above all else. And all the while the cloak remained at her shoulders, a constant presence, pulsing with life, binding her closer to the Alpha's world. Yet danger was never far. Rumors from the court reached her in hushed whispers, nobles debating whether she was a threat, whether she had learned the ways of the Alpha too quickly. The daughter's cruelty did not relent. Instead, it sharpened, moving from open mockery to calculated schemes. Alara had to remain vigilant, knowing that any misstep could unravel everything she had gained. One night, under the cold light of the moon, the Alpha summoned her to the heart of the forest. The wolves gathered silently, forming a living circle around them. The trees seemed to close in, the shadows deepening, as though the forest itself had grown aware of what was about to occur. "You have learned much," he said, voice echoing softly against the frost-covered trunks. "But now comes the true test." Alara's pulse quickened. "A test?" He nodded. "A trial of the heart and the mind. You will face something that seeks to break your spirit. You must decide whether to yield to fear or rise above it." The Alpha extended his hand. "Trust in yourself, trust in the cloak, trust in me if you can." Alara hesitated, caught between fear and the strange, thrilling pull of destiny. Finally, she took his hand, feeling a warmth that was not entirely physical, a connection that reached deeper than her understanding. The wolves stepped back, leaving the path before them open, yet the darkness beyond the trees seemed alive with anticipation. They moved silently into the shadows, the forest closing around them. Shapes shifted, whispering winds carried voices that were not entirely human. The Alpha did not speak, but his presence anchored her, steadying the storm of emotion within her. Alara realized, as they moved deeper, that she was no longer merely a participant in the Alpha's world. She was becoming a part of it, whether she wanted to admit it or not. Suddenly, from the darkness came the first trial. Shadows twisted into shapes, figures of doubt and fear, whispering lies that clawed at her heart. "You are unworthy. You are weak. You will fail." Alara faltered, but the cloak pulsed against her skin, steady, alive, and she remembered the Alpha's words. "Trust in yourself." She took a deep breath, pushing through the fear, and raised her hand. Light, faint, silvery, as if drawn from the moon itself, radiated from the cloak, scattering the shadows into the frost-laden air. The Alpha's gaze met hers, sharp and approving. "Do not let the past define you," he said quietly. "Do not let fear rule your steps." She nodded, chest heaving, and in that moment, a bond deeper than words formed between them. Not of ownership or control, but of trust, forged in shadows, courage, and the pulse of shared destiny. As dawn began to touch the forest with pale light, the Alpha led her back toward the castle. Alara's muscles ached, her heart raced, yet she felt alive in a way she had never known. She had faced fear and survived. She had stood against whispers and shadows. And she had glimpsed a truth she could not yet fully name. That strength was not only in power, but in courage, in trust, and in willingness to face what one most dreaded. But the trials were not over. As they approached the castle, a flicker of movement caught her eye, a figure in the trees, watching, waiting. A sense of foreboding settled in her chest. She did not know who it was, nor what intentions lay behind that shadowed gaze. The Alpha's voice, calm yet commanding, broke her thoughts. There are always those who will test you, Alara, and sometimes the greatest trials come not from outside but from within. She looked down at the cloak once more, its sigils faintly glowing, and felt the weight of responsibility and destiny press upon her shoulders. She was no longer merely a participant in the Luna selection. She was bound to the Alpha, to the pack, and to a path that would challenge every part of her, her courage, her mind, and her heart. And somewhere deep in the forest, the watching figure moved closer, silent as the wind, knowing that the next trial would come sooner than she could imagine. Alara hugged the cloak tighter, drawing strength from its warmth and pulse. The Alpha was near. The wolves were near. And though fear whispered in her mind, she knew she would not falter. Not now, not ever. Because the shadow of destiny had chosen her, and she had chosen to rise to meet it. The sky over Lithuria burned with the first light of dawn, painting the frost-tipped towers in shades of gold and silver. Alara stood at the edge of the Moonspire cliffs, the wind whipping her hair around her face. The cloak draped over her shoulders felt heavier than ever, its sigils glowing faintly with the pulse of the Alpha's power. Today, she knew, the trials would reach their peak. The forest below whispered with the voices of the unseen, shadows twisting as though alive. The Alpha's pack gathered silently at the base of the cliffs, their golden eyes reflecting the rising sun. Alara's heart raced, not from fear alone, but from the weight of destiny pressing down upon her. She was not alone. The Alpha emerged from the shadows, tall and commanding, his silver eyes reflecting both the light of dawn and the darkness that had haunted him for centuries. His presence, as always, was both a comfort and a challenge. "You are ready," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the cliffside. "But the final trial is not against them. It is against ourselves." Alara nodded, understanding immediately. This trial was not just about facing enemies or shadows, but about confronting their fears, their doubts, their pasts, and the choices that had shaped them. Below them, the shadowed figure from the forest days ago stepped forward, revealing itself to be a sorcerer who had long coveted the Alpha's power. He raised his staff, dark energy swirling around it like smoke caught in a storm. The wind carried his whispers, sharp and twisting. "Your bond is fragile. You cannot stand against the fate I will bring." Alara's stomach tightened. The Alpha stepped beside her, the cloak fluttering in the wind like a banner of defiance. "Do not let fear control you," he said. "Together, we are stronger than he believes." The sorcerer laughed, a sound that cut through the morning like ice. Shadows rose from the forest, forming creatures of twisted shape and snarling teeth. Wolves leaped forward to meet them, but Alara knew the true battle was more than just physical. "Trust in yourself," the Alpha whispered, placing his hand lightly on hers. The touch was fleeting but grounding, sending a current of courage through her. The cloak pulsed beneath them, alive with the energy of the pack, of the forest, and of the bond that had formed between them. The shadow creatures lunged. Alara focused, her instincts sharpened by weeks of training. She raised her hand, and a wave of silver light radiated from the cloak, scattering the nearest shadows. The sorcerer sneered, sending another wave, darker and heavier. She countered instinctively, feeling the cloak guide her movements, whispering secrets she did not yet understand. The Alpha moved beside her, a seamless partner in battle. Each step, each motion, each glance communicated strategy and trust. Together they pushed forward, their bond growing stronger with every moment. Alara realized that the cloak was not just protection, it was a connection, a channel for courage and shared strength. Then the sorcerer struck, sending a blast of dark energy that knocked Alara off her feet. She slid along the frost-covered ground, breath stolen by shock. The cloak fluttered around her, and for a moment she feared all was lost. But the Alpha's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Elara, trust the bond." She closed her eyes and felt the pulse beneath the cloak steady, alive, guiding her. She rose, letting the energy flow through her, and in a single motion she raised her hand toward the sky. Silver light erupted from the cloak, brighter than the sun, illuminating the cliffs and forest below. The sorcerer screamed, shadows shattering into mist, and the wolves howled in triumph. The light enveloped the Alpha as well, intertwining with his power. Together they formed a bond stronger than any dark force, uniting courage, trust, and the magic that ran through the cloak. The sorcerer fell to his knees, defeated, his ambitions shattered by a force he could not comprehend. When the light faded, silence hung over the cliffs. The forest below seemed to breathe, the shadows retreating, the wolves standing proudly at the base of the cliffs. Elara turned to the Alpha, her chest heaving, her hands trembling. "You did it," she whispered. He shook his head, a rare softness in his eyes. "We did it." Together. For the first time, the Alpha stepped closer, not as a figure of authority or command, but as a partner, an equal in the bond forged through trials, danger, and trust. He reached for her hand, and this time she did not hesitate. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as though they had always belonged together. The wind carried their shared heartbeat across the cliffs, and Elara realized how far she had come. She was no longer the timid noblewoman who had walked into the Luna selection. She was a survivor, a partner, and a part of the Alpha's world. A world of power, danger, and passion that tested the heart as much as the body. The cloak fluttered around them, torn slightly in battle but glowing faintly with the pulse of their bond. Elara traced her fingers over the sigil one last time, feeling a sense of completion and promise. "Your trials are over," the Alpha said, his voice low and resonant. "But your journey is just beginning. This kingdom, this pack, it is yours to protect as it is mine." Elara nodded, understanding fully the weight of his words. Together, they would face the court, the daughters, and any shadow that dared rise against them. But for now, they stood side by side, victorious, unbroken, and bound not by fear or obligation, but by choice, courage, and trust. The first rays of sunlight illuminated the cloak and the cliffs, silver and gold mixing like fire and frost. It was a new dawn, a symbol of hope, strength, and transformation. The Alpha's daughters watched from the castle walls, silent and subdued. Their cruelty had failed. Their schemes had been outmatched not by brute force, but by courage, trust, and the bond between Elara and the Alpha. For the first time, the daughters realized that power was not just inherited or claimed. It was earned, and it could be shared. Elara felt the wind tug at her cloak, the whisper returning softly, faint as a memory. "The shadows may come again, but you will not face them alone." She smiled, a mix of relief and resolve. For the first time, she truly believed it. She was not a pawn. She was a force in her own right, a partner to the Alpha, a guardian of the pack, and a woman who had faced fear and found strength. The Alpha's hand tightened around hers, and he spoke quietly, almost to himself. "The world may be dark, but together, we are the light that shapes it." Elara looked out over the cliffs, the forest, and the frost-covered fields of Lithuria, feeling the pulse of life, magic, and destiny all around her. She had been tested, humiliated, and challenged. She had faced shadows, both of the forest and within herself. And now she stood on the precipice of something new, not just survival, but transformation, trust, and a bond that would endure whatever storms lay ahead. The pack howled in unison, a sound that echoed across the cliffs and into the valleys below. It was a sound of victory, of unity, and of power tempered by courage and wisdom. Elara lifted her face to the rising sun, the cloak fluttering around her like a living thing, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly free. The Alpha's gaze met hers, silver eyes filled with warmth, pride, and something deeper, something unspoken but undeniable. In that moment, words were unnecessary. Their bond, forged in fire, shadow, and trials, spoke louder than any proclamation or ceremony. The cliffside was quiet once more, the forest calm, the pack vigilant. And though the world beyond Lithuria still held shadows, whispers, and trials, Alara knew one truth above all: she would not face them alone. The cloak was more than a symbol. It was a promise, a shield, and a thread that bound her heart to the Alpha, to the pack, and to the destiny she had chosen to embrace. As the sun rose higher, painting the world in light and frost, Alara stepped closer to the Alpha, ready to face whatever came next. Not as a victim, not as a pawn, but as a partner, a guardian, and a woman who had discovered the strength within herself to shape her own destiny. And in that golden light, Lithuria seemed to hold its breath, as if the kingdom itself recognized the dawn of a new era, one of courage, trust, and the enduring power of hearts united against shadow. The journey had ended, and yet it had only truly begun.